Morena and good morning, everybody. Welcome to, I see we have members of the public with us today, but welcome to the council meeting of Monday, the 29th of April, 2024. Just a reminder in terms of health and safety, if the alarm sounds, we make our way out that back door, which is our nearest emergency exit, and we assemble on the other side of the road and await further instructions from staff. Do need to be aware that this meeting is being live streamed and then the video is publicly available on YouTube. Reminder to everyone to either turn your mobile phones off or turn them on to silent, please. Shad, can I ask you to open with a karakia?
Morena tātou, kia koe rā Anne. Tātou katoa, kua huitahi nei tēnei ata. Tuatahi rā, ka tuku ka huri ake rā ngā whakaaro kia rātou kua mene nei te pō, I wā tātou hoia, nā rātou I mate ki wāhi ke, nō reire ngā mate haere atu rā. E kira ka tuku mihi atu rā ki tēnei rā, rā whakamaumaharatanga ki ngā pakanga ki puke hina I te rānei, nō reira tuku mihi kia rātou kia tātou katoa. Just firstly, just wanted to acknowledge you, Anne, for chairing our meeting this morning, but also acknowledging Anzac Day we had last Thursday, and then also today remembering those that fell at Pukehinahina. Me tīmata hoki rā tātou, me tuku karakia. So I'll just open with a short prayer. Nō reira kia nui tātou. E te atua nei rā mātou huitahina I tēnei ata. Ka tuku rā ngā whakamuimasi ngā whakawhetai ki a koe. Toro mai rā tōringa kaha ki runga I a mātou, hei āwhina nei, hei tohu nei I a mātou ratu I nei mahi. Ko te tumanako kia whaihua rahi tika rā mā tātou katoa. Tēnei mātou ina tēnei ki a koe, korori ki tōnga tapu. Āmene.
Thank you. Thanks, Chad. Okay, so no apologies. We're all here. That brings us to the public forum, and we have a number today. First up is Glenn. I've got my glasses on. Glenn, are you here? Yeah. Thank you. You know the routine. Make sure it's turned on. You've got 5 minutes starting now.
Morena. Right, I'll start with why I'm here. So I'm making this feedback on behalf of Sustainable Bay Community Trust. I've been a public transport stakeholder for probably a decade. I work in Durham Street. I use the bus most days. I actually work with a Mercury staff member on the Greater Tauranga Travel Pledge group. I know most of the background of this project, including, I've got to say, some of the confidential background. And I've been involved in the stakeholder engagement, the sort of official stakeholder engagement, which has been good, but drawn out is probably an understatement. Waiting 13 months for a second or third meeting. What I understand is that the selected routes and the bus stop locations are not what the regional council or the initial consultant wanted. The only reason the regional council supported the Durham Street options was that an accessway or arcade would be built between Grey and Durham Streets. So we're now told that's not part of TCC's final proposal. All the options being discussed have been described as suboptimal. That's at the workshops and also in many other forums that I'm sure you'll be aware of to some extent, if not the detail that I know. And that includes things like the, is it called the Inclusive Accessibility Forum that TCC runs, those kind of stakeholder groups. TCC staff have done well to try and justify what's being proposed, but it's very obvious when you talk to them that they don't fully support it either in their heart of hearts. So what has been described as by one of TCC's key partners is the best of a bad bunch that have been put forward is option one out of these 4 options that are on the table. But it seems from all the reports that the issue is that no property owners anywhere in the CBD, including the council, want bus stops by their property. And that seems to be the fundamental issue. Because there's plenty of good options and they've been proposed over time. So the question is, what should council do? So we suggest that because no property owners want it. The issue has to be more around what you've signed up to strategically, which is to deliver a public transport system that gets many more people on buses. And all the justification for Tariko, for Cameron Road, everything's based around more people on buses. That will not happen if you put a suboptimal CBD interchange in place. We think you need to pay far more attention to what bus users want than what private property owners want. Given that all the travel on buses is through the CBD, every bus service in Tauranga will continue to be through the CBD, I'm told. 35% of people using buses or boarding buses there are transfers, but 57% of all accessibility users, that's people with disabilities, severe mobility issues. 62% of all youth boarding there, and they have security issues. I know from first-hand experience, people are not using buses, especially teenage girls, because of that concern. We also think you need to listen carefully to not just the stakeholder group, but to general feedback, to bus surveys, bus user surveys, but other non-bus users, to social media posts who have some really interesting posts out there.
1 minute.
We think there should be 3 on the table: an off-street bus interchange. Secondly, bus routes that access the key area by Red Square, either on Willow or Grey Street. That should be a second option. Third option is option 1 from today, with toilets, with better protection from the weather than what's being proposed. Durham Street's windy, glare, rain, and an access way between the 2 streets. And finally, because you probably, I presume, have now got to the point where you won't look at all the other options, we think that you should choose, out of the ones being presented, if you have to choose one, we'd reluctantly support 1A, a hybrid between 1 and 2, which is that you put it in front of Mercury. I'm told reliably by Mercury staff that they do not allow public access in and out of their building. It wouldn't need to be by their doorway. You'd still be replacing only 1 rain garden, but it would not require it to be in front of the parking building and cause people to cross that entrance by the parking building. It's the worst of the options out of those 3, but it's the best out of the bunch you're putting forward.
Glenn, any questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next we have, so we've got a number, so we've got Dwayne Roper, Peter Cooney and Aaron Collier from Zariba Holdings and Classic Group. Good morning. So
Morning.
you've got 5
Morning
minutes.
So my name is Aaron Collier. I spoke to you back on the 18th of March on behalf of Classic Group and Zariba Holdings. To my right here is Daniel Watkins. Mr. Watkins is a director of Classic Collective. Mr. Hugo, who's a director of Boffa Miskell, he's the urban design director at Boffa's, and Mark Appledorn, who's the traffic engineering director of Boffa Miskell. So unfortunately, Mr. Cooney and Mr. Roper have had to travel to Auckland this morning to attend a funeral. But as I said to you back on the 18th of March, there are 2 sites that are owned at the southern end of Durham Street. And we fully participated and attended the workshop that was held. I think there was something like 14 council staff members there back on the 5th of April. And at that workshop, there were 2 kind of key issues that were discussed. The first was really the location of the stops. And we supported the council resolution around the pepper potting kind of idea. And we kind of worked through a series of options to try and minimise the impact of where these stops were. And I agree with paragraph 3F of the staff report around the importance and significance of that, particularly to the building owners. And the second issue discussed at the workshop was really the form and function of the stops themselves and the shelter-related issues, because our view was that that was where a lot of the interference was going to occur, potential social issues, etc. And that was a really critical design issue that was raised by the landowners. So in terms of the location of the stop, we provided a map with the optimal locations, but that does not seem to have been considered, or it hasn't come through into the staff report. And we did tweak some of the locations of those stops, so it was a much more pepper potted kind of approach. but none of those stops involve more than a sort of a 1 minute walking distance from what had been proposed. For Zareba and Classic, the situation as recommended in terms of option 2 is even worse than the original proposal, in that it blocks legal access to their site in terms of their crossing, and we're not quite sure how that's even going to work. But back at the earlier council meeting, one of the key issues was around design. It wasn't just about location, and cost, and also timing around what's required now, what's required in 5 years, and what's required beyond. And I don't think that's really been addressed. There were some cross sections provided at the workshop showing the shelters, and there was a lot of dialogue and discussion about those. Effectively, there's a 1.6 metre gap between the shelters and the walls of the buildings. So we're not quite sure how that's going to work in terms of form and function, given that in that space we're expected to have active frontages provided for the buildings, entries and exits from the buildings, and two-way pedestrian flows along Durham Street within that 1.6 metres. So that was described by me at that workshop as being effectively a narrow alleyway type of effect, which I think is completely inappropriate as a planner in a streetscape such as the one that we're looking at. It just doesn't interact well with the buildings, the active frontages and the pedestrian movements. So my overall conclusions are still that the upgrade of Durham Street wasn't originally planned correctly, and this should have been looked at when the original planning was done for Durham Street. And given all of the constraints that we have, my view is the most appropriate planning response is actually to provide some kind of off-street facility. And that's where I've got to in terms of my thinking. But given the options that are on the table, and that's not one of them at the moment, going back to the staff options, we consider that option 3 creates the least impact. It utilises some of the existing parking spaces and the areas of open frontage where there are car parks, and it only involves 4 stops, not 6 stops. So those are my kind of comments back to the council following the workshop and following that earlier meeting. Mr. Mornay and Mr. Appledorn may have some further comments, and then we're happy to answer any questions.
About one more minute.
1 minute. I mean, I think the main concern is the practicality of a narrow corridor in front of a whole bunch of future redevelopment sites. There will be social impact issues, but the biggest issue will be people standing around those bus stops and blocking that even further. And I think from a practical point of view, it's pretty clear that it doesn't work. So, I mean, that's what we just want to get across, is that none of those options that have them very clustered actually function at all.
I think I'd just comment that as was indicated in the earlier submission, we really need to go back and say, is this kind of an outcome going to deliver the step change in public transport use that we're looking at and that we've been investing in infrastructure? And I've got some grave concerns about whether that's actually practically going to be achieved with any of these options. And it just, where I've got to is that it really, I think we need to sort of circle back and kind of just revisit that question again and take another careful look, because the focus has really moved to trying to deal with a whole lot of things that are sort of pulling the whole thing apart for the reasons that have been outlined. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Can I just get from you, what numbers are you?
The Zareba and Classic buildings are at 134 and 142 Durham Street.
All right. Any other questions? No. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we have Francis Devontier from Guideline Properties. And you're at 162.
Okay, so I'm here today to strongly voice our objection on behalf of Guideline Investors, the owner's representative of 162 Durham Street, being on the corner of Durham and Elizabeth Streets. First and foremost, I'd like to express our disappointment with the effort made to consult the owners regarding this significant change on our street. The timing of this meeting, coupled with the scant notice that's been provided, has left us little opportunity to adequately prepare. It's disheartening to note that the agenda was only circulated on Anzac Day, with Friday being the sole day available for preparation, a day when our key personnel were unavoidably absent. Following the previous proposed council meeting, it was our understanding that studies would be undertaken to assess both safety implications and the commercial impact on our retail businesses. Regrettably, we have yet to see any of these such studies, let alone plans for the proposed bus shelters. As proprietors of 4 active shop fronts along Durham Street, the prospect of installing bus stops with these shelters poses a significant threat to the commercial viability of our tenants' businesses. Moreover, we cannot ignore the disastrous consequences that the current bus stops have wrought upon the northern end of Durham Street currently. The proposed bus stops continue to present grave concerns for us, and we are resolute in our determination to prevent their implementation. Allow me to outline some of the key issues. The safety of vehicles exiting our driveway is compromised due to visibility concerns up and down the street. There are safety risks involved and associated with the proximity of the proposed bus stops to pedestrian crossings and the roundabout on the corner of Durham and Elizabeth Streets, particularly given the narrowness of the street. The loss of valuable on-street parking spaces exacerbates existing challenges. Despite assurances from council regarding excess parking availability in nearby buildings, the reality on the street contradicts these claims. Continuous removal of street parking within the CBD has been a consistent source of frustration for local businesses, with no tangible alternatives being provided. The width of Durham Street. This presents inherent safety challenges, a fact acknowledged by council itself.
One minute left.
Yeah, it is perplexing why the council persists in insisting that this is the only viable location for these super bus stops. The lack of foresight and poor planning is evident in the extensive gardens recently installed in front of Waikato University, despite the long-standing knowledge of the envisaged bus stops on the street. Logically, if Durham Street is indeed the only feasible option, the university premises would seem the most suitable location. The argument that removing these gardens would be wasteful is simply untenable. Instead, the proposed course of action further erodes parking availability, undermines CBD retail, and pushes forward a concept that is both unsafe and lacking in thorough assessment and consultation. With all due respect, it is your duty to represent our interests and uphold the commercial viability of our local businesses. And as representatives of local business and property owners, we categorically reject this proposal. We refuse to be coerced into submission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is it Francis? Yeah. So I'm interested, did you not get invited to any of these stakeholder meetings? We've heard from 2 others.
Made it to the first one. Unfortunately, not the most recent. I've asked for any plans or even minutes for that meeting and haven't received anything.
I don't think they were formal meetings. My understanding is it was
one, right, was a formal meeting that didn't make it to, yeah. But any information that came out of that meeting, I haven't seen.
Thank you, Francis, for your presentation. And I understand the impacts on you and your businesses. I do use the barbers down there frequently, so I understand the impacts there. Just in terms of what we're trying to grapple with, I suppose, is challenges with accessibility, but also challenges with trying to provide bus stops somewhere along this corridor. And I'd be interested in your thoughts about where do you think the most appropriate place for bus stops on this corridor might be?
I don't know, it would have been nice to see some different options. Originally I'm talking to tenants, possibly Cameron Road, a little bit more out of town. I haven't seen any of those options presented to us. We were unaware that the bus stops were looking at going in when the grounding was being put in. When Durham Street was being developed, we brought that question up and was told that no, there wasn't going to be a bus stop on our street outside our building. So I think I don't catch the bus. My daughter catches the bus sometimes from Durham Street to Papamoa. There's not a lot of people on her bus, but I think it needs to be a little bit out of town, not running through the centre. Definitely not on Durham Street, right next to the roundabout, proposing to put in a pedestrian. You've got a narrow street, possibly you've got one bus stop looking like it would go outside our buildings for four entrances to different tenancies, and another bus stop across the road with potentially buses going either way. That's 4 buses across narrow street. Probably would have been thought of previously. I don't know if there's more out of town.
Okay, thank you very much. And that's the dilemma, the 3 different perspectives. Okay, so moving on through the agenda, we do have a late item, and that's an item in public excluded, which is the Harrington Street car park proceedings. Bill, you move that that's be accepted into the supplementary agenda, and Stephen second that. All those, or any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. There is no confidential business to be transferred into the open. We have no change to the order of business. That brings us to the confirmation of minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of April. Any corrections to the minutes? Moved as correct by Bill and seconded by Shad. Any discussion on those? All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. That brings us to declarations of conflicts of interest. Shad.
Thanks, Anne. Just for items 12.8 and 12.9, fast track consenting approvals or fast track approvals bill, and the Porteri, I'm still actively involved in supporting Crown development. Also, I will refrain from participating in those 2 discussions.
Thank you. That's noted. That brings us to deputations, presentations and petitions, and we have a petition from Gordy Lockhart, and I think we got some people. We've got Gordy, the Honourable Jan Tinetti and Ben Hurley. Now, I just want to be clear what your expectations are of time, because normally there's a presentation which is 5 minutes, but there's 3 of you there. Are you expecting 5 minutes each, or are you happy to stick?
No, we're not. No,
Okay.
We've divided the time.
I'm just
Okay.
very specific.
Okay, that's, we always reserve the right to ask questions. So we're in your hands, starting now.
Kia ora, ko Ben Hurley tokunga, ko Ngāti Porou te iwi. I'm a Bay of Plenty resident. I'm here today to proudly and humbly represent the folk that identify with the sign of the rainbow, specifically those in my geographical community, the community of my business that I work in, and those in my family. The sign of the rainbow reaches a very broad spectrum of society. It represents pride, tolerance, inclusiveness, and community. I'm also here today to talk about monuments. I'm a student of history, and great civilizations have always built monuments that pay homage to the innovation and progression of that time. The ancient Greeks built great houses of thought. The Romans built structures like aqueducts and roads that literally shaped the modern world, In medieval Europe, they built great houses of worship like cathedrals. Our own Māori built mighty fortified power sites. These monuments endure in our stories and our whakapapa because they most accurately reflect the proudest achievements of the times in which they were built, whether they be philosophy, modernism, religion, or bravery. Humanity has progressed for the better because of these times, and the monuments are testament to that. We've been through the Age of Enlightenment, the Space Age, the Industrial Revolution. What is our age now? I'd like to think of it as the age of inclusivity. Unfortunately, history is dominated by oppression, bigotry, inequality. However, these things are changing. The task is far from over, but to right the wrongs of the past, but there are gains to be proud of because of people like Gordy. So call me an optimist, but the time we live in may be looked at as the time where great strides were taken forward to ensure all citizens of Aotearoa, New Zealand, feel safe, free, accepted, and we should all be proud of that. So if this is the age of inclusion, tolerance, and progression, how do we honour that? I think we can all agree we don't build great memorable things anymore. Apartment buildings, roundabouts. Do these reflect this time where we're taking great leaps forward? A rainbow pedestrian crossing that can be a monument, a testament to the age of inclusiveness that future generations can recognise and build upon. It's not the Parthenon or the Pantheon or even the Sky Tower. I mean, imagine trying to get the pyramids at Giza through the RMA. This is much cheaper. Yes, it's some lines on the ground, but it means so much more than that in actuality. It's better than a mural or street art. It's a monument that has everyday practical use and that can honour the present. And now I'm going to hand over to the Honourable Jan Ginetti.
Kia ora koutou. I want to just put a little bit of a human touch to why something like a rainbow pedestrian crossing is so important to our city here in Tauranga. A few years ago, I was principal, as you know, at Merivale School, and I had a pupil who enrolled there who had been excluded from a number of schools before they got to Merivale, and they were pretty hard going, and we didn't always see eye to eye. A few years ago, that young person came to me as a young woman and had transitioned as a young woman and said to me, "You knew, didn't you?" And what I really want to say to you is thank you for seeing who I was. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for supporting me. Thank you for having my back always. And that's what I think the Rainbow Crossing can represent here in Tauranga. We as a city can stand up strong and say, we see our rainbow community, we support our rainbow community, and we've got the back of our rainbow community at all times. And it's not just something that some people will call woke or virtue signalling. This is something that means something to our community. This is something that can make a difference within the community. That's the city that I want to live in. That's the city that I want to be part of. That's the city that I absolutely believe in, the city that has the back of all our communities.
So, Gordy, that leaves you with about a minute. Trust the politicians and the comedians to
make it quick and,
Yes.
and concise.
I mean, I did skip over some, I could go back.
Me too.
No, I think, thank you very much to Jan and to Ben for making a very, very good point on that issue. And I think it simply leaves it to me to say that the crossing element, you guys, I'm sure will be aware, is crucially important as opposed to simply a piece of art. The crossing says that we as society will stop for inclusivity. That's ultimately what it says. It's a meeting place. It's a place where we all come together to celebrate diversity of our communities, not specifically necessarily the rainbow community, but our entire community. Every one of our social identities and ethnicities can be represented in the rainbow. And to me, in 2024, that's what that represents. And I think the other aspects too are about brightening up the CBD. There are many, many, many things that will happen in the CBD over the course of the next 3 or 5 years. And what could be better than adding a bit of a rainbow to say, look, hey, this is who we are, but also it improves the place and makes it look fantastic. Tourism is a major aspect of what we as a city look to attract. And rainbow crossings are known worldwide to attract tourism. People come down and they do the Beatles. They do the Beatles walk on the crossing and they take photographs, and it is a major part of the tourism industry too. So I would very much love to see in 2024 Tauranga City Council and Tauranga Moana adopt the symbol of diversity that is the rainbow crossing, and I hope that you'll agree that that is required.
Thank you very much. Any questions? for the group? Yeah, shared.
Thank you. Thank you for your petition and presentation. And, great to have you guys come in and present that. I do note in the report that we got that at the moment, I think it was about 500 people had submitted to the petition.
905 this morning.
Thank you.
Okay, so the process for a petition from here is that the staff will then go away and produce a report. Our last decision-making council meeting is May the 20th, because obviously there's elections in July and it's not appropriate that we continue making decisions through that process. So if it makes it back to us before that May 20th, because it then has to come back to council for sign-off, so be it. If it doesn't, it will then go forward to the incoming council. But thank you very much. Really appreciate you coming in. And the City Council does quite a lot around inclusivity and diversity, as you might have read in the agenda further on. But thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I think we received the recommendation is we receive the petition. Bill will move, Shad will move that and Stephen will second it. And then we ask for a report from the staff. Okay, so no recommendations from the other committees. That brings us to the business section of the agenda, and the first item is the Durham Street bus facility, and I see the team at the back there, Sean and Tom and Nick.
Kia ora, good morning, Commission and members of the exec. Excuse me. Subsequent to the last council briefing, we have conducted a number of workshops with the developer and community stakeholder groups as it relates to Durham Street and the previously proposed super stop arrangement on Durham Street South. We thank those stakeholders for the positive and pragmatic input to reach an option which is an amendment of a previously presented option, which we acknowledge has required compromise on multiple fronts. We think this option does present the best outcome for the greater good of the city, the greater good of the users of the PT service, but for the longer term as the city centre development continues at pace. We've arrived at an amended option, a recommended option, which uses the length of Durham Street between Elizabeth and Spring Streets to still provide a PT hub in this area of the city, while preserving the critical development opportunities as much as possible for the growth and the continued evolution of the city centre. Also make note that associated with this works is a parallel effort to secure a lease site on Cameron Road, adjacent to the fire and emergency station, to make use for bus lay-by, which will significantly reduce the amount of stationary buses and vehicles on our city centre streets. This improves the experience of the city centre for all, whether they are in vehicles on foot or on bicycles. It frees up space for other uses by businesses and community, and it preserves space and access for critical construction to occur over the next few years. I'll now hand over to Sean to talk through the technical details of the option.
Yeah, so I think there's quite a lot of technical details in the report, but I'd just like to make acknowledgement that the eastern side of Durham Street in particular is very constrained, and there are a lot of property interactions with entrances and access ways along that zone. So two of the submissions in the public forum were on that side, and just making note that that eastern side just because of the development, the existing buildings, the proposed buildings, there's no great place for them. However, we believe option 2 provides a solution that will provide for all the requirements. I'm happy to take any questions on it.
Thanks. Look, I think what we heard this morning is the dilemma that we've faced from the time we started looking at where does this go in the city. And the temporary one went up on the northern end of Durham Street. And in some ways, it reduced a lot of the issues that we'd had in Willow Street. And it showed us that where you have lots of nooks and crannies, where you have facilities, and you make an interchange a place where people want to gather, there are social issues. And that's what we saw in Willow Street, some of them quite physical and quite confronting. And by moving up to a more linear layout, it reduced that attractiveness, if you like, for people to hang around. And so we've, to my knowledge, we've only had a couple of incidents over the 20 odd months that we've been up on that northern Durham Street. And so a much better experience for the people who are waiting for buses. But the time has come to make the decision and for the long-term bus interchange or super hub, I think it's now called. And that sort of reflects the change that's going to come both to the city, but also to the services. So moving from that hub and spoke over time to a more through service. So less likely, a slight reduction in the number of changes between bus services. The difficulty we've had, of course, is that all those services will still go through the CBD, and that's normal. But we have a very constricted CBD, and so as we've worked through over the last couple of years, A, the construction sites, and B, how the city will flow in the future, Durham Street had long been identified as the bus public transport route. And so it makes sense that somewhere in Durham Street we cited that super stop, or originally it was an interchange. So that's what's brought us to where we are today. The Durham Street North were temporary, and it's good to see that that's still an option under consideration to see whether we in fact stayed there. But I understand there's all sorts of issues with that, and we're now looking at that wider Durham Street South area. But you can hear, especially from the 3 different presentations we had this morning, this isn't just a transport solution, and that's the problem that we've had all the way through, is that they've been designed by people focused on the best transport solution. And Stephen and I, through the Joint Public Transport Committee with the Regional Council, have long argued that you don't design the centre city around just a transport solution. It has to be designed around people, both using public transport, both using cars, operating businesses and developing the city. So, and we had that laid out for us again this morning. So for me, the first question that I have is listening to the business, the developers who are donkey deep in the design of this, by the looks of it. The 1.6 metres between the proposed shelters and their buildings, is that with the shelters right to the front of the pavement? Or is it, as we've seen in Cameron Road, with the shelters back from the pavement?
So the cross section that we've had drafted up shows about a 2 metre clear space between the building line and the shelter, and a seat, rather than sitting right up adjacent to the building, sits in the footpath, allowing a free space for people to travel along the building frontage, and then a space which is about 1.6 metres for people to sit under shelter, waiting for the bus, and then move from that shelter to the bus, not interacting with the through space along the back of it. Making note that at busy times, that space is likely to be overflowing. However, that's what we get for having a city centre where all of our street corridors are relatively narrow.
So you're satisfied that, so you've got a 2 metre gap, not a 1.6 is onto the street frontage from the shelter. That's a 2 metre. And are you comfortable with that 2 metres? You don't think you need to give it a bit more behind?
I don't think anything's ideal. However, it's the maximum gap that we can get while still allowing for somewhere for people to sit, waiting for the bus along front. And as we've seen from the current location, having people sitting right up against that building frontage has been a significant detractor.
And the shelters are basically, because I haven't seen a cross section, but they're basically a roof and side structure, but no back to them.
Correct. And
quite an open look.
And making note that this will go to detailed design post a decision on where they are, and we'll engage with the directly affected stakeholders to work out what that design exactly looks like and how we make that interact.
And then accepting that we've still got the hub and spoke, what's the timing from the regional council on their moving to their through? I've just lost track. It seems to have taken an inordinately long time, and I'm not sure where they are in that process.
2027.
Still 3 years away. And when do you think this will be operational?
I'm taking note that the temporary facility was ideally already abandoned by this point. We'll be aiming for Q3 this current year to get something in the ground which will enable the current temporary facility, along with the bus stops currently along Grey Street, to be relocated.
Okay, so for me, the key to this is that alternate site for the layovers, because we experienced it in Willow Street with buses sitting there idling. We know we've had it in Leander Street over in Arataki with buses sitting there idling. The vibrations and the noise and the general disruption is unacceptable. So for me, this is contingent on getting a place where the layovers where the buses can get off the streets and lay over on a separate site. You haven't got that in your recommendations. I know there's negotiations going on at the moment, but for me, that's going to be a critical part of this.
It is. So it's outside the scope of the report as we've presented it, but we are currently in negotiations which could potentially be confirmed with Fire and Emergency New Zealand this week to lease the vacant lot between the old Cameron Road dive shop and the current Cameron Road fire station for that interim period to get us through to the point in time where Regional Council begin operating the new through routing model. So that gets the vast majority of those buses off city centre streets.
That must enable then about, I counted up 12 buses hanging around the centre of town the last time I walked down to Bay Court. So that must free up about 20 odd car parks.
Yes, and we think we can get between sort of 8 and 10 buses. We're just waiting for a bit more detailed study on how we can get the vehicle tracking to work in that site, and still meet some requirements with fire and emergency for ingress and exit. But it's a real win-win opportunity for us to get the city centre not being a parking lot for buses. Regional don't want that. We don't want that. Nobody wants that. It provides more space for on-street parking within the city centre network, and it also removes the lay-by function for regional council PT operations from the city street, which is less than optimal for them, to somewhere which is close enough, very, very close, just on Cameron Road, but is not on the network. It's a network adjacent.
Okay, so I would like to add a recommendation, which I'll talk to my colleagues about when we move, that we provide off-road layover space for buses until the through service is implemented by the regional council, so that we can assure then retailers and business owners along that street that they're not going to have buses sitting there idling outside their place. It will be a bus service that stops, delivers passengers, gets passengers and moves on. I think that will make a big difference. And then the other question is recommendation C2 doesn't seem to make sense for the interregional bus. Is that Grey Street to Spring Street? Or is it Grey Street to Cameron?
Grey Street to Durham Street, sorry.
Grey Street to Durham Street, right. Okay, so that's my bit. Bill.
If I can just follow up, commentary around the lay-by. Chair, would you envisage, if there was that recommendation, that the provision of the lay-by area, wherever it is contingent in terms of this approval? The reason I raise that is that if they're still considered as two distinct projects, one could carry on without the other, and we're no further advanced. This would. Okay, no, that's fine. A couple of, in terms of the flicking to the interregional bus service, and there's commentary, and where am I? Particularly, I think in Elizabeth Street, the concern about the buses obstructing the view to retailers. What is the frequency on a daily basis of the interregional bus service? I just wanted to get a bit of a sense how often that service is there.
Yeah, so from my understanding, it does vary a little bit, but about 4 or so a day, 4 or 5 a day. The issue with interregional is almost sort of the same with the regional, is that they do lay over in the location for a fair length of time, being that it's a place, they operate maybe Auckland to Tauranga, and then they stop there, their driver goes on a break, and they make sure that they make up the time that is required. So very similar issue in that it's actually not so much the frequency of it, it's the amount of time that they spend in the stop.
Just in terms of then the stops the proposed stops in Durham, and we heard earlier this morning in terms of the suggestion of having one outside Mercury. So has consideration then been given as part of the discussions, if that occurred in terms of the relocation of any of the gardens that are lost there further along Durham Street, and then who would pay for that relocation, given the concerns raised by some of those who have properties that they don't want the bus stops outside of their property?
So Mercury and the landowner of that building have been quite vocal as well about it not being in front of their frontage. So we haven't given a whole lot of consideration at this point, but happy if in that option is provided. However, noting that then it just adds another stakeholder in who doesn't want it. They, in particular, are anti it from a health and safety perspective, being that since they're a relatively customer-facing business, they don't allow customers inside their building. However, they quite regularly have quite angry customers come try to see them, and they don't want that interaction between public and their building to create additional health and safety concerns for them.
Just flicking back to the interregional location, because there's the two options. What is the preference?
From a transport perspective, Elizabeth Street. From a city centre perspective, in my view, it's still Elizabeth Street, however, noting that it does have impact on some of the only sort of bigger box retailers that we have left in the city centre.
So that the interregional would also go up to the Cameron Road site for the layover?
No, so their buses are bigger and
okay,
there wouldn't be space for that.
Thank you. Gosh. Yeah, I mean, all of the options, reflecting on the conversations we've had this morning, and even just your comments about Mercury. I mean, none of these options are optimal for any of our stakeholders we've been engaging with. Everybody's got a view and a perspective, and ultimately they don't want it either in front of them, and then also from an accessibility point of view, looking at the various options, it's not optimal from an access perspective as well. So trying to come to a compromise solution that actually no one's going to be happy with, I suppose is what we're seeking. And in a way, I mean, option 2 provides compromises across the board. Some are going to be impacted more. Some of those property owners in particular are going to be impacted more by the location of various bus stops. And then access and accessibility is going to be impacted to some degree by option 2. I mean, when I sat at home last night, I did some calculations, and I looked at like the distance between the two extremes was about just over 200 metres, which was about a 3-minute walk. I mean, I use the buses a lot, and I mean, a couple of minute walk for me won't make too much of a difference. I mean, I don't transfer. I'm only really using one bus to and from the city centre. But for other people who are able, 2 to 3 minute walk probably won't make too much of a difference. But for those that are mobility impaired, that will be a bit of a challenge. So that's just getting access, but then also access down into the city. So you've either got to go back down towards Spring Street or back down towards Elizabeth Street to get access. I mean, there are the lifts in Spring Street, so if you are mobility impaired, there is that option, so you can get from grade to grade, and that's always been there. That's always been an option. I do have a question, and well, I'll make a comment first, and then ask the question. So, back in 2017, when that whole corridor was upgraded, there was always a view that buses will be put through this corridor. And my question is, at the time, and it sounded like the lady from the corner was aware that buses were going to be using this corridor. And I assume that was agreed between the City Council and the Regional Council at the time, that ultimately buses will be passing through this corridor. How much input or consultation or engagement was done with those businesses, those users along that corridor at the time, knowing what we know today?
So I have done a little bit of digging into that. Didn't manage to get a whole lot out of it, but noting that the communications plan and the approved collateral that went out at the start of the project was noting that this was a potential route and a potential place for buses in the future. However, there hadn't been anything decided as such between that and Grey Street at that stage. So it was a potential option rather than a set in stone.
Kind of brings us here today. I mean, I'm pretty settled on option 2, knowing that it's suboptimal. All the options are suboptimal across the board, but looks like the logical choice across the 4 options presented today. Yeah, I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Really matter whether it's Grey Street or Durham Street. They're both narrow streets. There isn't an option of a wide street anywhere.
Yeah, and still retailers and the like. Yeah.
And the lady, Frances, suggesting Cameron Road, of course, then takes it even further away for people to get into the centre city. So, Stephen.
Thank you, and I think Shad summed up the dilemma well, and just to your comments now, there's no question that if we were looking at Grey Street, we'll be facing exactly the same issues there as we are in Durham. We are between a rock and a hard place on the selection. I too favour option 2, though I do have some questions that arose from the property representatives' commentary. The first is around the 1.5 metres, which we understand will be closer to 2 metres. The existing temporary site in Durham, what width is that? That must be even less, I would have thought.
So the boundary to boundary width is the same. So it's it's more or less the same. It's just a different arrangement, noting that the current stop shelters are particularly wide and obtrusive too.
Yes, so the walkway through would be more constrained, I would have thought.
Correct.
And yet it seems to have, I mean, it's not ideal, but it seems to have functioned reasonably well.
It does have less people transiting through, in all fairness, being that there's less to access.
The other, so I was actually surprised that following the discussion with the property groups, one of the groups presenting here today came back and said they were less happy with the outcome now than they were with the original option. And I'm trying to understand that. Why is that the case?
So I think that was based on my understanding, that is just with quite how the bus stop has been placed in front of their properties, there's definitely some room for adjustment there.
Right, so that's really the key point that I wanted to get to, is that I think it's important that those discussions are held. And that kind of leads me to the last matter, which is this question of design. So whilst we can settle on, I think, the best of the compromises today, which might be option 2 in terms of locations of the stops, I think there's still quite a bit of discussion to be had around the specific design, the specific location, and the look and feel of these stops to make sure that they are complementary to the building developments and not detracting from them. I think if we were able to collaborate on those issues, then we may well end up with a better solution from the property developer's point of view. I take on board the comments of Glenn earlier and around the accessibility matters. And I think option 2 tries to get the balance between those issues and the property owners, neither a party of which are going to be ideally satisfied, but that's the nature of a compromise. So I think with those conditions and around the lay-by, working with the property developers into the final location of the stop so that that doesn't interfere with their entrance ways, and also working collaboratively in the design, I'm happy to support option 2.
Sorry, I just had one further question or comment and question. One of the attractions, I suppose, with option 2 in particular is the spread of the bus stops. I mean, my observations and experience in using the buses is when you've got bus stops, 6 or so bus stops over a 150 metre section, and from a behavioural point of view or from an antisocial point of view, you get people congregating, well, not so much congregating, but exchanging with others across the road, and I suppose disruptive. I think spreading it, there's from my perspective, my understanding, you'll have less of that, because if you've got another bus stop 50 odd metres down the road, you're not going to necessarily have that type of exchange happening, from my observation. The other matter I did want to raise is, and I don't like the term, but the hostile architecture, I think the term is, where you and we've got a couple of them down on just outside the Farmers Building, where you've got seats that don't provide an opportunity for people to linger or to lie down or to and where there's an opportunity to integrate some of that thinking. So it's a design philosophy around trying to move people on. So you could have through lighting, through sound, and we do have that down on the wharf structure, where there's music continuously playing, so people won't set up camp and that kind of thing. So yeah, where there's an opportunity to integrate some of that thinking into the design process, where they're great places for people to wait 5-10 minutes for a bus and then move on, but not great places for people to start congregating.
I'll take the first bit on the Durham Street arrangement, and then let Sean get to the hostile architecture. But one of the advantages between the previous option presented for the arrangement on Durham compared to this recommended option now is that it uses the length between Elizabeth and Spring, and that disperses the volume at peak time in morning or afternoon that would be congregating at those stops. So it dissipates the volume pressure of people using, as Aaron pointed out earlier in his submission, a narrow width of space between active frontage and roadway. The previous option presented at previous council, when we were still looking at the super stop arrangements, condensed all of that volume and those bodies and that pressure into a much shorter length of space. So those cross street interactions would have been more severe or more frequent, or would have seemed like they were occurring with much more than perhaps they will by using the length to dissipate that use of space and relieve that pressure and relieve the impact on active frontages.
And yeah, just to add, absolutely agree with you, and don't like the term hostile architecture either. It's about discouraging the loitering and but still allowing somewhere for elderly and those less able to sit. So there'll be a balance of not only the design of the seating, but also the amount of seating. So allowing enough space for the elderly and those less able to sit, while not providing so much space that it's just somewhere good to sit or lie down for extended periods of time.
Perching rather than a mixture of perching and seating and standing. Okay, look, so I'm happy to move that we receive the report on the Durham Street bus facility, and we adopt for implementation option 2, C that we adopt for the interregional bus C2, which is Elizabeth Street between Grey Street and Durham Street. D, that we provide off-road layover space for buses until the through service is implemented. And do you want clarity in that this is conditional, that's conditional on, so D would be conditional, option B2 is conditional on providing off-road layover space for buses until the through service is implemented?
Thinking, Chair? Yes.
Yep. Mick?
Sorry, on D then, that would suggest if we say that we provide it, that we pay for it, and that's not the case in the negotiations we're having with regional council, but it's a cost share arrangement. So
Provision on provision.
yeah, we can provide the
Provision.
locality, and we organise the costs share the costs with the regional council.
So changing provide to provision. So it's neutral.
That'll work. Yeah, thank you.
And the only other thing is, so I'm happy to move that, but I do think we are willing to consider, because I think the contentious stop in option 2 is outside 142. So we are willing to consider that going up to outside Mercury, but we would want some compensation for losing another, if we have to lose another garden. So I don't think we should put in the recommendation, but I think we signal that we are happy to consider that. But, you know, the ratepayers paid a lot of money for that development of that streetscaping. It's looking really good, and we would want to be compensated if we lose another garden, because at this stage we're losing a garden outside the university and a garden outside the car park. Is that right?
Yeah, so we'll be losing just over 25% of the garden space.
Which is deeply regrettable. But I think it's the worst compromise. It's the best compromise that we can get.
Just wondering about an E, which
On the design?
yes, that the transport department work collaboratively with the property owners to achieve an agreeable design or words to that effect. Or yeah,
Within the parameters.
So an E would be that we ask the staff to work collaboratively with the stakeholders on the design of the shelters, design and location of shelters.
Yep.
Yeah. Happy with that? Yeah.
Yeah, as long as it defines those locations as being that area of Durham South that we've agreed
Yeah, so
to.
we've agreed to option 2.
Yep.
Then we're just saying the design, because we haven't got the design in front of us here, and there are obviously still concerns about that. So we're just ensuring that the staff work collaboratively with them on the design and final location in the street, in the pavement. So location in the pavement.
As long as the option 2 thing is the overriding thing. So we've committed to 2 bus stops on either side of the road at the Durham Street South end, and we're going to tinker with the exact location, working closely with the developers, because if there's an opportunity to move it 2 metres to the left that makes it more palatable, then we're all up for that. Yeah.
So what about that the staff work collaboratively with stakeholders on the design and pavement location of the shelters? That allows you to move it that way. Happy with that? Happy to second? Right, good. Okay, shared.
One final question, and I think, I mean, you did answer it about the layover for the interregional buses, and there isn't. So from what I understand, there is insufficient space to cater for that bus on the layover site.
Yes. So the layover site will be at capacity based on regional council's requirements for bus layover spaces. And noting that it wouldn't be just a one-for-one replacement, being that those buses, the interregional buses, are larger.
So what is the effect if so the other alternative was Spring Street, which I know isn't your transport ideal. I am a bit concerned about it sitting there all day outside a number of businesses.
I'm happy if we add to that we'll work through with regional council on reducing the amount of time that it does stay there, and we'll look at alternative layover provisions, even if it's just around the block, for example.
So you want to add into C2 that you continue to work on the layover options with regional council?
Well, no, that wouldn't be with regional council, because the interregional services are operated by separate operators.
Oh, okay.
We'll work
So
through with the
C2 would become adopt for implementation Elizabeth Street between Grey Street and Durham, and continue to work on alternative layover options.
We can.
Happy with that? Yeah, I think that's quite important if we can relieve those businesses during the day, because they are big and imposing.
Yeah, I think it's important to note too that over time, the bus service will transition from diesel buses to electric buses. So the environment will positively change, and certainly from a noise perspective. So we need to keep that in mind when we're thinking forward as well. It's not always the way it is today.
Yeah, but I also think the reality is we are in a transition. The centre city is in a transition, and this might not be the solution for 10 years' time, when many more people are using public transport. And it's already been pointed out today that we may need a specific site where this happens. Where it is, we've been trying to find it in the city, but that's the reality, and so successive councils will be perfectly capable of coming back once we've had this major rebuild of our CBD. That would be the appropriate time to come back and have another look at all of this and see how it's working and what the next 10 years might look like. And by then the regional council might have its through service in place as well, and that will make a difference to the way people use public transport. I am an optimist. All right, okay. Anything further? So we're all clear on what we're moving, which is option 2, option B2, option C2, and continuing to work on that alternate layover. Option 2 is conditional on the provision of a road layover space for buses, working between the regional council and ourselves until that through service is implemented, and then that the staff work collaboratively with stakeholders on the design and the pavement location of those shelters.
Can I just ask you?
Off-road layover, yeah. All right, I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thanks very much. I know we have been over and over this. I see we implemented the temporary solution on the 13th of June 2022. I think we started discussing it in 2021. So, thank the staff for their patience, but I don't think we've resolved it. We didn't think we could resolve it then. I don't think we've resolved it now to everyone's satisfaction, but we have a decision and we're now going to get on and do it.
Sorry, Anne, could I just add thanks to all the stakeholders who have been along the journey as well.
None of them will be happy. Is that the ultimate compromise? All right, thanks very much. Okay, on to something cheerier. I'm not quite sure. The business case for connecting Mount Maunganui, which for those who don't understand, it's Hewlett's Hull Tortora.
Correct. Good morning again, Commission and Exec. I'm joined by Neil Mason, Director, Major Project Delivery, for this brief. This report was submitted prior to the NZTA Values, Outcomes and Standards Committee meeting and subsequently making a decision which has quite an effect on what was previously proposed in the recommendations. So this brief will now be an update only, and I understand that Jess Andrew of NZTA has met with Exec and Commission last week to brief elements of that decision. That was just slightly mistimed for us on this report. So following the NZTA decision last week, this is now an update only pending further work between TCC, NZTA, stakeholders and partners on this project. We no longer need a decision on the recommendations until such time that the IBC is finalised in line with the terms of reference issued by the VOS committee to the Wakakotahi project team. I know you've been updated by the recent developments, so this will summarise the situation as it is now. The TCC report has been drafted prior to the VOS committee, and the VOS committee.
What's the VOS committee?
Value, Outcome and Standards. Sorry, perhaps I should just explain that a bit further. So the VOS committee is a subcommittee within NZTA, which essentially acts as a investment decision gate on way to between submission of a business case and it arriving with the NZTA board for co-investment approval. The VOS committee has not endorsed the IBC in the current form until additional work has been undertaken. This decision is based primarily on the low BCR of the recommended option, which currently sits in a range between 0.3 and 0.6. The affordability of the proposed recommended option, as it applies to all partners, TCC and NZTA inclusive, and the need to consider a phased approach that provides the NZTA board with options to better manage risk. I expect this will address some of the TCC concerns around the affordability in detail and issues around staging that have been raised by the VOS committee, although TCC is happy with the horizon plan as it sits currently within the IBC. This will also, I expect, to look at wider network impacts during the delivery and implementation phase of the recommended option. The committee will soon outline specific additional considerations that need to be worked through before the IBC is resubmitted to NZTA. We will work with NZTA project team on every step of this to get back to resubmission. The NZTA project manager has advised that it is likely that these changes can be done within the existing budget for the IBC phase, but that detailed cost and time implications will be better understood and shared with partners following further analysis and receipt of the detailed instructions from the VOS committee, which we have not yet received. TCC staff recommend that a subsequent report to council will be required if the IBC recommended option, as outlined in the current report, is substantively amended through the IBC updates and finalisation. We don't yet have a timeline for how this will occur. I would not expect it to be done by the May council meeting. That completes the summary. I'm happy to of course, answer any questions with the information I have.
Look, thanks for that. So I must confess, when I read the report, knowing what had come through last week, I was concerned about the tone of the report, and we've struggled with the development of this, trying to elevate the economic benefits of this project. So I remember at one stage where public transport was the top priority for the development, and we said, how nonsensical that was. This is about how do we mix a growing, critical piece of infrastructure like the Tauranga port. How do we match the needs of that with the needs of our population that use Hewlett's road to get from Papamoa through to the CBD and Tortora to get from the Mount through to the CBD? How do we match all that? And so active mode change with existing bus lanes, it just seemed crazy that we were focusing on active mode change rather than how do we get freight safely in and out of the port, and how do we match that with our needs of our population. So when reading through the report, the questions that I had was, how much of this is active mode? Because it looks like a heck of a lot of it is, and will this endanger the project? And I think the reality is that it has, because nowhere do we see the importance, the critical importance, the national importance of that freight movement in and out of New Zealand's largest export port, which is only going to grow. And I think we're close to being the largest import port. So that hasn't come through. And I think that's reflected, not being a transport expert, but that must reflect in the BCR. So what I understand is that NZTE has saying this project as it stands is not acceptable. It doesn't meet the requirements. We want to take a pause and we want to go back and we want to have a look at it. And for TCC, it's one of our 5 major transport projects to unlock economic development and economic growth and relieve congestion for a large majority of our population. So are you saying that, is your understanding that NZTA are looking at this to get a cheaper option, that we're in danger of losing that overpass, which seems to be the critical element for the port, for the long-term benefit of the port, which is economic growth, which I understood the new GPS was really focused on, or is this just an opportunity to reshape this with that emphasis on economic growth, servicing the port, and then addressing congestion?
With the information I have at the moment, which I do need to state is incomplete until we have further detail from the committee and from NZTA, I think the answer is probably yes to all of the elements of your question. Part of it is that the IBC has arrived at the Voss committee almost at perfect storm timing with the new GPS, which has had very significant consultation feedback and is still in draft status until approved. That allows us the opportunity to review the IBC, achieve greater alignment with the new GPS for land transport, which does have potentially a positive impact on the throughput, the freight, and the economic drivers that you mentioned. Second component, the affordability. NZTA have signalled that as a component of the feedback that they've been given. There is in all projects, always the desire to get all of the outcome for less of the monetary input. And the longer we drag this along that x-axis of time, costs are only going to go up, and they are already sitting at very significant numbers for both NCTA and TCC, for both the state highway component and the significant local road aspects within the area of the business case as well. So specifically to your point about the flyover and the impact on the port, if specific individual components of infrastructure like the right hand out of Totara towards the Harbour Bridge flyover are removed to alleviate the congestion and improve the efficiency of that junction are removed, then all of the benefits incurred by that item are also removed. So we can't have more bang for less buck.
I think for us, that's a critical element. I mean, I think some of the things like getting a safe cycleway from the Mount into the CBD can be handled in different ways. So we can lose some of that because we can deal with them in different ways, and it's certainly cheaper to get a cycleway through that industrial area than it is to build a road through that industrial area. So I think there's things that we can do with that, but there's some critical elements which we shouldn't let go of, and in the business case. Neil, I know your responsibility is for these 5 major projects. Do you want to add something into this conversation? I'm sure I'll hear you say it will never be cheaper than it is today.
Jess did offer to come along and answer any questions, but in light of the conversation that she and I have had, I didn't see the need, bearing in mind it is an update. Just a couple of headlines. We agree with the horizons and the way they've been presented. If we don't create space, we won't have enough room to build a superstructure under Horizon 4 and 5. My only observation is the fastest way to achieve it is to follow the process. And I believe that this is in search of assurance that there is no cheaper alternative, and that the study that has been done does identify a best cost solution.
My understanding is that they reported to us that they took an extra 3 months and worked with some of the mana whenua and went through a large number of options and settled on the flyover as the best option for achieving what we need to achieve, and B, from a cost perspective. So for me, I really would like to get this review done as quickly as we possibly can and get on with it, because we're just wasting time, and day by day, as we've seen, it just gets more expensive. So I don't know, what's our alternative? Stephen?
Look, I totally agree. The opportunity cost of time is critical here. So we need to maintain the focus on this project as on the Regional Transport Committee agenda, long-term plan, it was the #1 project.
Yeah.
From an economic perspective, it remains the most significant project from that point of view. The fact that it has such a low VCR indicates the wider environmental social mitigation components that have been included, and they are desirable, but the benefits are often hard to measure and assess. To me, we've got to make this decision promptly and get on with this project. It is a critical one for the future development of Tauranga, and I would hate to see us have the process now delay what is the right decision. The fact that we can focus on the economic story, I think, is actually quite beneficial, because that is the primary purpose of the project. And so I think that is a beneficial outcome of the VOS process, and they've been right to raise those questions, but I feel confident that we should be able to properly answer those. On a wider note, I may say, one of the reasons why we are constantly in this churn of having to reevaluate, defer and postpone really important projects for the city's development is that we don't have the revenue streams necessary to fund the level of investment that's required in the first place. And so that is why I was keen in my time here as Commissioner to raise the prospect around time of use road charging or road pricing on our network. Because not only would that enable us to use a corridor like Hewlett's Hold Tauranga more efficiently, we're not using it efficiently at the moment, but it would also raise the revenue streams necessary to enable the investment to make a better transport system for Tauranga. And so the longer we defer those decisions around how do we pay for this stuff, the more strife we're going to be in. And today's project discussion really just illustrates that once again. So I personally think the longer term result will be getting best use for how we spend the money, but also ensuring that we have revenue streams to enable the best investments to be made. And until we get to that point, we're always going to be paying.
So Neil and Tom, how long is NZTA proposing that this next step take?
We were informed of the VOS committee outcome last week, and we don't have a timeline from NZTA yet about how long the review and resubmission of the IBC will take.
So my frustration is that this has been led by NZTA from the beginning, and we have argued with them all the way through that their emphasis was not on the right benefit, which was the economic growth, not only of this region but nationally, and the Tauranga port. And that's been a consistent theme every time we've met with NZTA. We've raised this with them, that we felt they were focusing too much on all the wider active mode social benefits. Not to say that they're not important, but the criticality of this has always been for us around the port and congestion. What if we took the lead in the review and then presented that to NZTA, because they're being instructed from Wellington. What if we did, as we've done with 15th Turret, had a look at it, looked at what is essential to meet those two needs and what isn't, and repackage that? Can we take control is really what I'm asking.
I don't know. I don't know if we can. This is not an option we've considered over the second half of last week. Once we heard the outcome of the VOS committee decision about whether they're a change in lead on this project, TCC will certainly be with NZTA every step of the review, and then we'll go back through council and committee for IBC approval prior to resubmission to NZTA. So I don't think it's as though we're looking at a process where we won't be involved in absolute detail and fully informed.
Yeah, but to be honest, Tom, I've lost confidence that NZTA will be listening to us, because they haven't listened to us all the way through, and that's evident in the report that economic growth and congestion for the people of this city have been a top priorities for them, and their consultation processes are long and endless. So we could be another 12 months if we let them continue on with their normal processes, and this city just doesn't have the luxury of that time. So what if we took a bit of control and had a good look at it ourselves? Do we have the resources for that?
Ultimately, we need to reach an agreement with NZTA on that, but I think we can go to them with some options on how we go about it, whether there's a change of lead, but also we could introduce some independence to that. And I think there's a lot to be said and try to find a path where it doesn't follow an ideology or another, but actually almost independent on who's in government, you have an option which speaks to both. Because often I think business cases can be driven in the words by the ideology that they're trying to support in order to get the funding. And I think sometimes business case developers can be a little bit too clever and follow too strongly the path that is attractive at the moment. So I think if we can get some independent advice on how to pitch in a way to sort of not depoliticize, but actually find a middle ground where you promote the benefits in a more neutral way. And so I think both organisations I think could use some support in finding something like that.
Would the oversight group be assist with that?
It's more that group is more an advisor on the delivery component. We have talked to the NZTA about having more of a strategic input in the oversight group like that, but it has been pitched more at the delivery aspect, so I think we would have to look beyond that. We could ask them for some advice, but we might find something useful from it, but I think we should also cast the net a bit wider than that.
Yeah, it might be helpful if we provide some information to the Commission on the role that we've played through this business case development process and our current involvement and what our involvement might be in these next steps. Because I know that for quite a period there, it seemed to be that NZTA were working with a degree of isolation until more recently.
My whole point is that we've had numerous meetings with them where we've emphasised the two critical components for Tauranga City, but it hasn't made any difference. So that's why I don't have confidence that just relying on them to lead the process now, we're going to get a different outcome. What we'll get is the cheap outcome that we've seen in the city over the last 10 to 15 years, where we have, instead of an overpass, we have a roundabout that quickly becomes clogged up. So hence my frustration that we've now reached this point and we're literally being forced to start again. And I'd like to see us this is critical to Tauranga City, so I'd like to see us take a leadership role in this and get on with it as quickly as we possibly can. And I mean, I'm happy to go with that proposal to, we can go and we can talk to the chair of NZTA, we can talk to the minister. We have a letter of best endeavours for an IFF levy that says we are different from every other council around the country because we have got a deal with NZTA to fund $175 million worth of investment from us, from our ratepayers, into the transport system for this city. So we are special, and therefore we should be demanding that we be treated as special. And that letter was signed off by 3 ministers of the Crown. So that's my feelings on it. So I don't know what you want us to do because I don't really want to receive even the report, let alone a stay of execution.
Perhaps, Neil, if you could just give an update on how we're currently included in this process and what that might look like over the next 6 months.
I think we should just focus on what we know. It is an incredibly expensive project. Whichever way we cut the measure of priority, it will come out as number one. It has done every time we've used different tools. This is probably the one that the draft GPS supports rather than hinders. So there might just be a requirement to review language. It is never cheaper than today, and the whole situation is not getting any easier. We haven't seen the recommendations or the requirements from VOS. We believe the conversation was led along Can we just make sure that there isn't a cheaper alternative that has been missed? So I think that's looking into an empty glass a little bit in terms of searching for something which isn't there. We support the Horizons approach. The way that the project has been laid out is a very good solution. Affordability is questionable, and in order to be able to challenge the BC, then it needs to be well supported and well presented. I think that I don't think it will take too long in order for us to redefine that it is entirely aligned with what everybody is trying to achieve. But it is a part of their process, and with such high costs, I can imagine the VOS are actually representing themselves well by making sure we just check and double check before progressing. When we get the recommendations, I suggest that Tom and I will have a look at those and work out how we are contributing to those to make sure we're testing the boundaries and accelerating them. We all see it as a no-brainer. It's a very straightforward process that we've got to go through, which just needs money now in order to get into the detail. But we need NZTA to be in exactly the same place as us.
Our next council meeting. 12th, 13th? So that's not on, oh, I see, there is a council meeting there. Okay, okay. So maybe the recommendation would be that we receive the report and then you report back to us at that 13th of May at the next council meeting on what that's looking like in the timelines and what we have, what our involvement would be.
Like I said, we believe that the requirements from VOS are around assurance, looking to make sure that we have tested all of those options for affordability. Now, we're confident that we have. The team's done a great job, but it is a huge cost with a low BC. So it needs to be belt and braces.
All right, so receive the report and then report back to the next council meeting on the 13th.
I'm happy
the
to
next steps.
Sorry.
Bill and Stephen.
Yeah, the other issue that needs to be considered is, have the wider economic benefits been adequately assessed in the process? Because the current business case is quite light on those.
So I guess we would want assurance that you're comfortable that that's the. All right. Happy? No. Okay, so I'll put the motion then. We receive the report and they'll come back to us on the 13th of May with an update on both the terms of that VOS recommendations and timelines and assurance that the economic benefits have been well included in the BC. Okay, all those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you very much. Gosh, it's all transport today, isn't it? Arterial route review. Morena.
Kia ora. Kia ora, Commission and Exec. As you know, staff have previously presented a report to you that investigated and our arterial corridors and improvements we looked at. You subsequently asked us to go away and further consolidate that and look to see how we could support the city to move around and people while the top 5 projects were underway. We've undertaken quite a significant amount of work on this. We've had workshops and we've learned a lot from Cameron Road Stage 1 and B2B around when big projects are underway, congestion increases, and we don't want to be adding to this. We want to see how we can support and help. So we've prioritised $10 million in the council's long-term plan. However, the investigations we've done have identified around approximately $23 million worth of investment will be required. Preliminary conversations that we've had with NZTA, they are advising us that at this stage it looks like we are well aligned with the GPS and we're looking for low cost, low risk type improvements that we can use. We would like you to consider, however, the low cost, low risk is for improvements that are below $2 million. So anything that is above that, we could consider adding our local share to that. NZTA are quite comfortable with that as an option also. We've identified a number of improvements that we can look to investigate further along the Fraser Street arterial to help support while the enabling works and 15th and Tarrant are underway. And we'll be looking to reroute other areas while there are other projects underway. Rulani can talk to some of the improvements that we've considered.
Can you hear me? There you go. So the focus, like Anna mentioned, was the Fraser Street Oropi Road corridor, because that's where a lot of the traffic will be diverted during the Welcome Bay project, as well as Cameron Road Stage 2 is underway. So some of the improvements just include clearways during the AM or PM peaks or managed lanes. So the main purpose of the further studies that we'll be doing is actually just to confirm what is the right suite that needs to be implemented along that corridor. And another improvement was looking at the Tauranga Enabling Works project. So that'll be maybe creating additional alternative routes, such as along Gargan Road, whether we can open that up temporarily during construction, as well as improving the Kawerau Road connection to State Highway 29. Another improvement that actually came up during the check-in, check-up with you commissioners was maybe installing a journey information signs along State Highway 29, just to maybe show people that, hey, the toll road might be a quicker solution than actually trying to go through Cameron Road or Cambridge Road. So like Anna mentioned, so we have come up with about 20 improvements, coming to about $23 million. A lot of the improvements are along, or we'll prioritize improvements along Fraser Street, as well as Tauranga Enabling Works. If we manage to get additional funding from NZTA, we could potentially implement 90% of the improvements we've identified.
Thank you very much. Look, a really, really good report. Thank you. We really appreciate the work that's gone into it, because it is going to be what we've learned from both B2B and Cameron Road is that people will find other ways, and the more work we can do to help them with that and manage that for the residents who are generally affected, the better off. I'm really pleased to see that you included those information boards, because I think that starts. Not only is it helpful to people, I noticed the one along the TEL that tells me if I take this route to Auckland, it's going to take this long, and it starts as the government has indicated they're moving to what do you call it? Time of use charging. It helps people start to think about which route do I want to use, how much am I prepared to pay for a faster route, etc. So it starts sending people down that sort of track. But I think you've done a great job and really thought through some great alternatives. So thank you. Bill.
I'm quite happy to move the recommendations, Chair. And just, I don't have any particular questions, but just a couple of comments. Great work. I really like the thinking that's gone into in terms of what the potential impact could be in terms of those key projects, and then what alternatives people will look at. As a rack runner, I quite like the language actually in terms of the figures that you've got attached to the report, because at the end of the day, people will look for those alternatives. So doesn't matter what you do, people think, okay, how do I get from A to B given there's something happening at point C? So I think the thinking and consideration of all of that is job well done. So just like to acknowledge that, Chair.
Before I come to Stephen, I did mean to say that Margaret Murray Bench, if we approve opening up Gargan Road to be able to be used, we'll be out there waving flags. I think she's been on that ever since we came and long before, although you're not promoting it as a long-term solution, just a short-term solution. Steve.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll second the recommendations. And just an item for consideration, in addition to the fixed notice boards, the use of apps, or particularly Google Maps, I personally find it invaluable. I typically always put in my route before I make a trip because I can use that to be a really efficient rat runner, which is not silly. I really just wanted to commend and underline the value of the figures that are included in the report. Figure 1 is on page 76, and it really goes to our previous agenda item, because if you look at the most trafficked corridor in Tauranga, with greater than 40,000 vehicles per day, it is that Hewlett's Road across the bridge, basically linking the Mount to the city. That is the most strategic corridor, and 40,000 vehicles per day. In fact, I think it's closer to 60 on the bridge. That's a significant volume of traffic, and it's little wonder that it's the number one priority and why we cannot afford to let that project go a drift through process. The other map that is really worthwhile looking at is figure 3, which once again reinforces that exact point, that the existing congestion levels are greatest in that corridor, but also the significance of State Highway 2, State Highway 29 and 29A. They are the core arterial as well as state highway networks. They are heavily congested already. And so, you know, we need to invest in those projects sooner rather than later, and we have to look at ways that can be funded. So I'd love to see those sort of charts and regular reporting just showing the level of congestion and traffic volumes that are on those corridors, because this is Transport 101 really for Tauranga, and that's where hopefully the new council will be able to keep their focus, because if we don't fix that, we won't fix Tauranga. So thank you guys, I thought it was a great report too, and let's keep focus on those core arterial networks and get them moving.
Yeah, just kind of rolling off the back of Stephen, when you look at the TEL on that particular figure, it's all green. I mean, so the government, you know, invested in that, must have been, was that open probably 6 or 7 years ago. Yeah, I mean, it took a while to build, but, you know, showing as green. So where we do invest, we can relieve some of that pressure on our networks. Yeah, I'm supportive of everybody else. I think thinking about all of these major projects and looking at alternative routes and how we optimize our current network, I think is critical. And you guys have done an amazing job in that. We also need to work with our regional partners. So public transport plays a key role in that. Walking and cycling, optimising how people access work, city, schools and those kinds of things. But also reflecting on where we've come from in terms of COVID, so opportunities to work from home. I think that still plays quite a pivotal role. You know, if we've got congested networks, actually, can I afford to work from home today? You know, will Marty let me stay at home and work? Park and rides, you know, those types of opportunities need to be factoring in that. But also picking up on Stephen's point, the use of technology. So I do the same particularly when I'm heading out of town, plug in where I'm going to and try and find the best and easiest route, avoid all the roadworks and that kind of thing. So promoting those types of alternatives, I think, is really important. Probably the one that I want to promote, and I don't recall, and we probably are doing some work in it, is the in our sustainability AIP, like internally as an organisation, when we get to that point of major disruption and those kinds of things, are there ways as an organisation we can better enable staff to get to and from home to work through the use of ride sharing and those kinds of things? I think there's a suite of opportunities I think that we need to kind of leverage through these particular projects because it is going to be disruptive. It is going to be disruptive for everybody and trying to make it less disruptive. I think the experience over the last 3 years with Cameron Road and B2B has shown that. So we do need to be thinking proactively, but also to be
proactive in terms of how we communicate with the community, thinking differently about how they move around our city. Probably just one last one, and that's on the Turret Road, 15th Ave section. I also think, so we're promoting Fraser Street and Cameron. I think, and using the VMS boards, I think is a really good idea. If the toll road is faster, I mean, for me as a road user, that might be another one of those to include. Yes, I might have to pay, but actually I'm going to get there 5 minutes faster than using Cameron Road, where I may have to stop at half a dozen traffic lights, or on Fraser Street, where there's schools and other businesses on there. So, yeah, just suggest maybe to also promote the use of Takatumi Drive.
Yes, I have. It's actually just following on in terms of the comment around Gargan Road. So on figure 9, in terms of there's further investigation required and also early engagement with NZTA and TBE, was just really hopefully all that's happening sooner rather than later, because that just seems one, dare I say it, relatively quick fix potentially in terms of some of those issues experienced out there at the present time. Given that engagement requirement, that in itself can take, as you know, time. So it's just making sure that that process starts as soon as possible.
So look, thank you. Really good report. The one they haven't got on there, of course, is a ferry crossing between Mount Maunganui and the CBD, but we're working on that, fingers crossed. Because I think that in itself would be helpful, especially if we get to do something on Hewlett's. That's going to be massive. All right, so it's been moved and seconded. Anything further? Had a good go at it? All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thanks very much. Yeah, so I think, what time is lunch? 12:30? Do we know? 12:30? Yep, she's giving me the. So why don't we take a 5-minute stand up? It's 11:27, so we have 5 minutes stand up and shake it all about. Meeting has resumed. Everyone likes to take their seat. And we'll probably get Stephen up to talk about local water done well. I know he's been waiting patiently, excitedly. Come and talk about waters. And Kathy. Neither of you look like Wally.
True, and thank you for that. I'm actually the passenger today. Kathy is the author of the paper, but I'm here in support, so I'll hand over to you, Kathy.
Kia ora katoa. Well, since the last time I've been in front of this group, the landscape has changed somewhat. Firstly, through repealing legislation from last year, and secondly, through the indications that we've got two new pieces of legislation coming towards us at the moment. So the first of those is expected any day. We haven't seen it, but we are aware that there are a key couple of points in that bill. So it's a transition bill only, but as we've got no insight yet of what that actually means, we do know that it does set out the guidelines for establishing CCOs. We also know that there's going to be a requirement for one-off water service delivery plans, and those delivery plans are going to be quite large. These plans will be the way in which councils inform government on how they'll deliver financially sustainable water services. Key point of these delivery plans is that they can be developed either individually or jointly. So that's a new thing for us. We don't really know what that will look like just yet. And we understand that we will need to let the Minister know by September 24 whether we'll be going individually or jointly with a water services delivery plan. So that's the first piece of legislation. Another key point about those delivery plans is they have to be delivered within 12 months. So by the end of June 25, we would have to have those submitted. The second piece of legislation, which won't be enacted until mid-2025, we will expect to see the first of that by year end. And I'm picking that it might be sort of maybe Christmas Eve we get to see that one. That bill contains more information in and around consultation and decision-making arrangements. Provisions allow for information to be provided on two options, and that's the status quo and one other option. So each council will be expected to provide two options in that space. So where are we at and what are we doing at the moment? So trying to keep on top of a changing landscape again. We've taken our own steps towards understanding our own financial analysis. So we're doing our own modelling. It's being done out of Paul's team. We have also gathered in the data, so the latest LTP data from both Western Bay and Hamilton City Council. So we're running a series of models. Whether it's 2 waters and 3 waters is also back on the table. So the models that are being run are quite extensive. It'll be go solo. Does it make sense to join in with a partner? Which partner? Is it 2 waters? Is it 3 waters? So it's quite complex at the moment in that space. And as I've quite clearly sort of pointed in this paper is that we are having conversations with our neighbours up the road. Those conversations have been quite positive. And also with Hamilton City Council, which is quite a different organisation. Of course, they're another big metro council. Quite different to ourselves, whereby they don't volumetrically charge customers and they're not. And that, of course, has repercussions out into that business space. I'm going to hand over to Stephen to see if he'd like to add something else to that as well.
No, I won't add much, but I think the point that Kathy raised at the start, I think a year ago we sat here and discussed all the legislation that was in play, the roadmap that was very clearly mapped out for us from central government. We knew exactly what steps we were supposed to go through. It was top down, it was driven, it was consistent across the country, and now it's been flipped. All of that's gone. We don't actually have that legislation, but the intent is for us to own the responsibility and the accountability for having sustainable water services entirely. And until we get that legislation put in front of us and know what is possible and what we can do, the best time is spent now is understanding the full extent of the economic outcomes that we would get if we were liberated to a certain extent with an ability to form CCOs in the new form, whatever that might look like. So that's kind of where a lot of the effort is at the moment. A lot of it also around talking with our neighbours and understanding their problem, but we know quite clearly what our problem is on the balance sheet.
So thank you for that very, very thorough report. I think from our perspective, the role of the Commission now is to ensure that there is enough information and some options on the table for the incoming council to further develop. And that's probably going to be their first big project to work on after their election. And so we need to make sure that they've got good information, knowing that they're heading towards a water plan. I think the other thing we can add in are really the three major concerns that we got from our community. One is that there is community ownership retained, and that community, because it's a community asset that's been paid for by the community. And so in any of the models, that ownership and that sort of site of ownership is critical to the community. Secondly, they didn't like co-governance, and in fact that was sort of supported by our rangapu, who really were interested in maintaining their rights and interests in their local rohi and the quality and the use of the water that is in their rohi. Not so much concerned with the distribution, the utility model, if you like, but really concerned about how their water is used at a local level, and wanting to continue to be involved in that. And one of the threats of what was known as the three waters was that they would lose a bit of control over that, and what happened to existing committees that were set up under resource consents, etc. So I think we are, with the work that you're laying out, those two or three issues are being front and centre as we're developing the information to inform the model that we eventually settle on. I think Bill's going to raise an additional recommendation that we make sure that whatever option we have, that it's not just exclusive. So later on Friday, the mayoral forum for the Bay of Plenty is meeting, and I think there's a workshop on local water done well. So there is the opportunity to work at that regional level, and that's being explored and discussed, but not every council is in the same time scale. I think, we're fortunate that we've done a lot of work and are in a reasonably good position, both with the work that we've done with Western Bay, but also with the continuing discussions with some of the other metros that we've had. That some of our regional councils are a bit further behind and perhaps a bit less confident that their communities understand it has been flipped from being driven centrally to being driven locally, and so I think where you are positioning us, I think for the incoming council is a really good position. They will have good information and a number of options to consider. But our main problem is our balance sheet. And so we continue to work with central government to make that as viable as possible for that separation, because otherwise we just don't have any capability of managing growth into the future. So Bill, did you want to talk to an additional recommendation?
Yes, thanks, Chair. And certainly note in terms of the recommendations, you've got recommendation C about greater effort on the TCC Western Bay models applied. No issue with that at all. What I was wanting to propose is that in terms of recommendation D, endorses that all models considered are future-proof to enable economies of scale to be achieved and allowing others to join. So it's really just being very clear that's that opportunity there. And it might have been meant in terms of economies of scale, but it was a wee bit too much code from my perspective in terms of the clarity. So that was the suggestion, Chair. And I also just had
Just on that, do you want to add allowing others to join in their own time? Because
Yes, yep,
they might
yep.
not join immediately, but they might want to join when they've worked it through with their community.
And really having a mechanism that they can join on their own time without a whole lot of process that goes around that of having to start again or whatever. So it's really making sure it's quite a streamlined process for that to occur.
Yes, that was definitely the intent, Bruce. We missed a few words out there.
And just a clarification in terms of and understand all the TCC Western Bay relationship, and we have currently we have joint arrangements. But in terms of those conversations that are being undertaken now, that includes stormwater?
Yes, it does. And I mean, the economic benefits in the longer term are very significant if you can get stormwater off balance sheet as well. So it definitely includes that. But we're also modelling it with two waters, just to be for completeness.
No, I'm happy to move those recommendations with the amendment to D, allowing others to join in their own time.
I'm happy with recommendations and Bill's suggested addition. Yes, though I do raise an issue. Economies of scale are an essential component and benefit, I believe, of water reform. But the other key benefit is the funding question. One of the reasons why water has struggled under the council delivery model is that in many locations, not like Tauranga, but in many locations across the city, they depend on rates decision-making, rates funding for the investment in water, which then politicises the whole kind of question of revenue streams to the water. The utility model that we see in electricity, telecommunications, depends on direct consumer prices or charges as the revenue stream that funds the investment profile. And I just don't think there is enough emphasis in the paper on that really important issue, how water is funded into the future and how the CCOs will be funded. If they are dependent, as in the Wellington Water scenario, where they have to go back, the CCO has to go back consistently to their shareholding owners to get the funding commitments necessary to support the investment, that model has seen enormous difficulties. Whereas the Watercare model, which enables Watercare to charge Auckland consumers directly for their consumption of water, and in their case it's based on volumetric charging, by and large has been much more effective. So I think that component of the paper needs to be clear. Now, you made the point in your presentation, you're quite right, that Hamilton City Council doesn't have volumetric charging like we do. I don't think volumetric charging, although I'm a very strong supporter of volumetric charging, because I think it helps on the demand management side as well, it will be possible to have water service charges that are not based on volume. They could be just a flat charge or whatever other basis. But the principle of having a separated consumer charge funding the investment is, I think, one of the key benefits of water reform and should be included in our proposals and consideration of CCOs. So I'm wondering, Chair, if we add an E, that we endorse models that enable, I don't know, independent charging or direct charging for water service use.
The only problem I have with that is that we're then making a decision that really the next council has to make. I think you're right that it isn't emphasised enough, and it should form part of the consideration. But to endorse it, we would then be saying that this is the model we think should be going forward. We could do that in our briefing to the incoming council. We could reflect that, but with this, we're basically setting up some options and some good modelling for the incoming council to consider when they put forward that water plan. So wouldn't you be better to ensure that forms a part of the modelling and the options that are put forward to the incoming council as they develop their water plan? And then in our briefing to the council, we could explain it more fully why we believe, just as you've outlined, why we believe that is the best option. I'm just a bit reluctant to tie the hands of the new council through this, because this is just.
Well, perhaps it endorses not the right.
Endorses the wrong word. Yeah.
Considers.
Considers. Yeah.
Or evaluates.
Yeah, that's what I'm suggesting, that we make sure that is clear in the modelling that's put forward for the councils.
If it helps, and it would certainly be in the modelling, but you would be unlikely to achieve any balance sheet separation without ring fencing of revenue anyway. So it will be a topic that will be included in that evaluation regardless.
Which once again just underlines the importance of that. I mean, that is, to me, is by far the biggest gain of all in water reform.
So what?
Didn't want to see that lost.
Do you want an E that then
notes?
Just notes, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That would be fine.
Just another comment that I think we will get a stronger indication of what all the strings attached are to getting that separation, that ring fenced. I mean, we kind of guessing at the moment to a certain degree. We need to know that detail because it does affect the way the organisation is set up. So there's quite a few things, but yeah, we can include that in our modelling criteria.
And it goes to the core of a decision to be in or out, I suspect, by some councils. And so that matter isn't addressed. Dickens.
What have you got?
I've got the E notes models that enable direct. E is notes that models that enable direct charging for water service users.
The criticality. It's the criticality of being able to charge for the full cost of the delivery of water services, isn't it? Sure.
I just thinking about the 3 points you raised about, community concerns about the previous regime, ownership, complex governance structures. The other one was cross subsidisation, and so need to provide clarity, I think, to our users that they're paying for what they get for, not necessarily paying for the neighbour's water at the same time. So I suppose figuring out the models and how we account for that across multiple councils.
I think we need to be careful because the whole point of a regional model would be that that was my problem in the first place, that I explained to our regional colleagues that the metros or the big towns help out with the funding for the smaller ones to ensure that they're financially sustainable. So if we limit that, I mean, that's why we're saying that the incoming council will have quite a big consultative process to go through when they decide upon a model for that very reason, because it may well be that there is subsidisation of the smaller councils who just do not have the equity to fund what they need to be financially sustainable. So and that will be a big conversation with the community. So we shouldn't try and hold them. Right. Yeah.
I'm reminded, we went back to central government on a number of occasions about their poor comms and engagement, and that they never really owned that issue. But you really are touching on a core thing here, is that it's up to us to really communicate and engage fully with people on all these aspects. So it's a big piece of work.
Okay, so we've had it moved and seconded by Stephen with the addition from Bill that all models considered are future-proof to enable economies of scale to be achieved and allowing others to join in their own time. And then E notes the criticality of being able to charge fully for, I didn't write it down, I just said it. Full cost of the delivery of water services. Did you want to add anything in, or is it just, you were just making sure that the models, yeah. Okay. All right, anything further? No, I'll put that then. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Watch this space. Street use and public places bylaws. So this is the decision that was made by Strategy, Finance and Risk Committee to adopt the street use policy, and that this is now the bylaw putting that into place.
Tēnā koutou, Vicky Ranasha from the policy team. So last year we went through that street use dining review. You agreed in principle to zone dining charges, which were then put in place through the long-term plan last week, the fees and charges. So this is now the bylaw controls that allow our enforcement team to make sure that people are getting that licence to occupy as part of those fees. And then also as part of the implementation, it was just raised that obviously over the mount, the street footpath widths are not compliant with the bylaw as it stands, which says that you need to allow a 2.5 metre pedestrian way. So we're suggesting that you use your power under the bylaw as council to declare a different pedestrian way width for Mount Maunganui and the side street, Maunganui Road and the side streets off it. And we're recommending a 1.5 metre width, which is less than what is ideal for an activity street, but reflects the current kind of state of the dining over there to try and closely align with what's in place.
So I think it seemed inherently unfair that we were charging one part of the city for on-street dining and another part of the city didn't get charged. So that it seems to me that you've what you're proposing makes absolute sense. It is a narrower footpath over there, and so. But the other thing about charging is, of course, you can then control how that's used. And I think that the complaints that I've had is that it's all over the place, and it is very difficult for people who are, particularly people who are mobility impaired, whether that's through sight impairment or pushchairs, elderly. I've had complaints from elderly in those little buggies and all sorts. So this seems
will make it easier to enforce for our regulation team as well, to have a clear decision on where needs to be kept clear so that they can educate businesses and enforce where needed.
That's right. Shad.
Thank you for the report, and I'm supportive of the report and happy to move it. I suppose what I do want to raise is that, you know, the narrow width of 1.5, yes, it is narrower than 2.5, but we need to monitor and enforce it, because, you know, sometimes when I go down there, it is really narrow and people are, you know, if you've got a push chair or somebody's pushing a bike down the road and you've got street diners out on both sides, it can make it quite difficult to manoeuvre and get around. So if we're going to say it's 1.5, then we need to monitor and enforce that those that have licenses to occupy, that they abide by that.
It will also include things like signs as well in the area. So the sandwich board signs can be quite an issue in terms of kind of poor placement. So the bylaw covers both signage and the dining as well. So that's another benefit of the change.
We're not requiring them to section off that area.
So it doesn't require them to have kind of cordons or planters or anything like that, but the property team are looking at whether we could have maybe some visual indicators, like in terms of just where the start and finishes, to help our regulation team know where should be kept clear, but we're just working through what that will be.
It's a dot on the pavement. Yeah. Okay. Oh.
I'm happy to second, Chair. And just following on from Shad's comments, enforcement, not just downtown the Mount, but also CBD. And it's interesting sometimes walking along there and the plethora of signs that actually impede you when you're heading, say, for example, along the Strand. So I see the enforcement happening everywhere as opposed to just the Mount. Just wanted to clarify that. And secondly, I was surprised that, perhaps I shouldn't have been, that NZTA had a recommended width. I presume, though, that there are no implications for us going to a lesser 1.5 in terms of any other future funding or anything else from an NZTA perspective.
I'm aware of. I
Okay.
believe it's a guideline, and a lot of our city sidewalks wouldn't necessarily meet the 1.5 metres necessarily in some of the older parts of the city.
Okay, so moved and seconded, Shad and Bill. Any further discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thanks very much. Mount Maunganui Air Shed Health Risk Assessment. Carl's racing up. Morena, I think we're still morning, are we? No, we're now afternoon. Just ticked over.
Kia ora koutou. Shall I give you a brief overview and then I can happy to take any
I think you can
questions?
take it as read.
Take it as
They're
read?
all read, yeah.
Okay, then happy to take any questions. If they get into the scientific side, I might have to come back to you.
No, look, I think we needed to do it, but the issues that were raised by the original report and are met within this review, we've really dealt with through as much as we are able to legally through the spatial plan. Are you comfortable that you think we've identified all the appropriate issues?
Yes, I think between regional council and ourselves, we're acutely aware of the issues, and as you say, through the spatial plan, but also through upcoming city plan work, so Plan Change 38, the business land framework, we'll be looking at a number of these issues, and regional council also have their air quality management plan in progress, including, such as Plan Change 13 currently underway and additional monitoring and so forth moving forward. So there are action plans to move forward to address the issues that we know exist.
And in the sub-regional spatial plan, the smart growth spatial plan, we've noted those changes, but I also raised the importance of noting in there the critical need to find space for those emitters, in particular our roading material manufacturers, because we don't want to lose them out of the area. We run the risk of them having really quite restrictive conditions put on them in that port industrial area and picking up and moving, and that just puts all the cost of our roading up dramatically. So even to the extent of trying to find somewhere for them to eventually move to, that is less restrictive for them, but enables them to remain within our wall is quite critical. So I sort of feel comfortable that we've addressed most of the issues raised. Bill?
And I'm happy to remove the recommendation, Chair, and then just noting on the way through and picking up comments you've made in terms of actually having an evidence base, both in terms of the Toiti Ora and also this work, so that they can be used in subsequent consideration of actions, decision-making, etc. So it's really the first time with both of those reports that we've had something that is on the table and provides a clear understanding of those matters, etc., etc. And also noting that the Environment Court, and obviously in terms of the regional consent processes, have also had regard to that work. So I think there's probably not much more we can do in this space apart from also the actions that we've already undertaken.
Yeah. So you've moved it, someone seconded, Shad seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thanks, Carl. Tumu, growth area, Wairakei Town Centre Transport. Sarah, is it? Yes. Good afternoon, and Andy.
It's all right. Could I kick off with just a couple of minutes of a bit of a strategic comments? And if you want any further introduction and detailing in the business case, Sarah can also make some comments, but it's just how you'd like to take the report. Yep. I'll just proceed on that basis. Thank you. So in terms of this business case, I guess when we got into it sort of 4 or 5 years ago and started thinking about this business case, it was in the context that NZTA have historically sort of provided 50% of funding for these larger collector and arterial roads in new greenfield areas. And that has included earlier stages of these sort of roads in Papamoa East, so including Te Okara Drive in the Wairakei area. So we started this business case around 2020, expecting a similar outcome, I guess. And being able to secure a significant amount of funding to deliver those corridors within Te Tumu, of which there are 2 very large sort of arterial roading corridors, largely 4-lane corridors. So one of them has bus lanes and 2 vehicle lanes. The other has, at least for a significant part of the corridor, has 4 vehicle lanes based on the ultimate build out of sort of 15,000 plus people living in Te Tumu. And these roads are limited access roads. So you can't build driveways off them. You can't have sections off them. You can have some intersections to other roads, but developers at the end of the day have to go and build their own separate local roads in order to be able to develop their land and deliver sections and houses. So these are roads, I guess, similar to, you know, Cameron Road or Papamoa Beach Road, those sorts of roads. However, I guess since we're beginning this process to completing this business case process, NZTA's, I guess, funding availability and funding policies, particularly in greenfield areas, have changed substantively. To the point where more or less they don't really sort of fund these roads anymore, or if they do, they only fund a small portion of, I guess, a better level of service compared to the baseline kind of road that a developer or the council would normally have to build itself. And I guess, therefore, consequently, the outcomes of this business case and what we're expecting from NZTA are certainly completely different to what we started with. But we still see the business case as having some value. It does unlock some funding, although limited funding. It certainly helps to complete the structure plan and rezoning processes that are required for Tumu. And it's going to assist in having, I guess, this documentation in place that we've got, planned corridors that are consistent with NZTA's, outcomes in terms of securing money through other funding opportunities that may arise. And of course, at the moment, we're looking at a city deal, and other things will no doubt pop up in future. I guess nonetheless, and my final comment would be that, these transport corridors are very expensive in Tumu, circa $400 million. And the current approach we have around funding from NZTA means that we have a substantive funding gap and a much larger funding gap than we anticipated to bridge here, which I guess brings, into question the challenge or the aspiration that we want to bring this development forward, but this is just putting, another hurdle in place to address, the broader housing and urban development challenges that we all know the city has. So with that, I'll pass it over to Sarah, who's Sarah.
Like a hospital pass, really. Isn't it?
Yeah.
Sarah.
Well, I do all the bad news, and Sarah can. Yeah.
So if I may, I'll just outline a little bit more about the intent of the business case so that you can make your decisions effectively. So this business case is rather large. It covers two areas. It covers the Wairaki area and the Tumu area, and we really want to ensure that you understand what we're applying for here from NZTA currently and why, and then make hopefully your decision to approve. So the Wairaki area obviously is the current growth area, and the business case details the concept designs for the key corridors servicing the Sands town centre. So the Boulevard, the Sands Ave, and Te Akura Drive, and the bus hub. So the business case does detail the cost estimates for these components, and it talks to the funding split currently agreed through the development agreement between TCC and Haven. Through the business case, we are therefore effectively requesting 10.4 million from New Zealand Transport Agency to support some infrastructure and property costs of the wider component for those Wairaki corridors. And that's based on the current NZTA's far subsidy guidance structure. The other component of the business case, and the two are very interlinked, we have to do them together in an entire business case. We've had advice from NZTA's investment team throughout the process that it needed to fit together, is the Tumu two main corridors, so the Boulevard and Te Akura Drive, that would run through the future urban growth area of Tumu. The business case has determined the preferred concept options for both these corridors to effectively service the Tumu future urban growth area based on population modelling for these growth areas. And we are only going to be requesting endorsement at this time for New Zealand from NZTA for these concepts, because at the moment there is no confirmed time frame. So they will not be able to consider this for an LTF funding currently due to the unknown or further out time frame of requiring the funding. But we'd like to get their endorsement for those concept designs now and their intent to subsidise in the future. We've, through the business case process, we've sought flexibility of corridor width acquisition with between minimum and maximums throughout the Tumu area. The business case was developed under the previous GPS, but it's important that we note that to effectively service greenfield areas from the outset, that multimodal opportunities need to be realised. To retrofit these it would be very costly at a later date. So we have retained that within the business case. And there's also a future opportunity to review the concept designs as planning and costing work is refined moving forward. So we'd like to put forward today for approval to submit the business case as it currently stands for those two components, Wairaki and to Tumu. And finally, I'll just note, we'd also like approval today to delegate authority to the General Manager, Christine Jones of Strategy, Growth and Governance, to approve updates to the business case, minor technical updates, and on matters associated with access through the multiple owned Māori land blocks that we will be working on moving forward.
Thanks, Sarah. I think where the Commission's sort of thinking is that even though the GPS has changed, we still believe that pursuing multimodal through those new growth areas is important, even if we just purchase the land and we don't get the funding, because it's really hard and expensive to come back later on. So we wouldn't want to see the corridors narrowed. That really limits your choices later on, because as we know from history, the GPS will change again. So that's the first thing. The other thing I don't have a problem with endorsing all of this. I think the work's very good and it's necessary. But I do wonder how much consideration I can hear Minister Bishop in my ears saying value capture, value capture, value capture, and how much thought we've given to these development of these corridors, because I suspect that that's going to be coming through loud and clear. And I think he made the comment when he was here last week about value capture. So how much thought have we given to that? And if we haven't, then I suggest in the background we start quietly doing some thinking about value capture. I know we're working with developers and it may well be that we've already got that, but I think we're going to need to be able to show that.
So in this area, what we're doing, which is the same as in Tauranga West, is requiring that all of the internal infrastructure within the growth area is built and funded directly by the developers to directly, I guess, sheet that cost back there rather than having it on our balance sheet affecting our ratepayers and all that sort of thing. So I guess directly that's probably our approach there. And what we were trying to do through this business case was to secure some third-party external funding to make it easier and more cost-effective for the developers to deliver. So now instead of them having to fund maybe 200 million, that the full 400 million cost still sits with them somehow, which is obviously becomes very challenging. But yes, and that is our approach to, I guess, value capture in a sense for the Tumu area.
So my suggestion is that you actually quantify that and make sure that that is clear, because I suspect from the Minister's comments that it is going to come through quite clearly. So if we're taking a slightly different approach, we need to show what that looks like, and just to make sure we've dotted the I's and crossed the T's. Any comments?
Yeah, Chair, fully endorse your questions and comments, and I think value capture is an important component of future transport funding. I guess I have some questions around the nature and form, though, of the concept that is being proposed here, and in particular understanding the connection between the transport corridor and the urban development. When I first saw the illustration, I asked the question, where's the car parking going to go for all of the properties that are going to be developed down this corridor? And you told me rightly that it was a limited access corridor. So then I start to look at the illustration on figure 1, which shows a cross-section of houses, walking, cycling, buses and cars. Presumably all of the properties are backing on to the limited access corridor. But I just wonder about the kind of livability and connectivity of such a corridor to the community. It's not going to be a particularly pleasant place to walk or cycle. I've seen corridors like this in Auckland, particularly around Botany Town Centre and the eastern side of Auckland, where they're relatively high-speed arterials and they have very limited walking and cycling patronage, just simply because they're perceived to be unpleasant places to be. So I'm just I guess in the absence of understanding what the structure plan looks like and how this road fits with the local road, etc., and then the value that might be captured from it, given that there's no access to the properties, I'm not convinced that we have the right answer here. And it worries me that if we go to the business case, we'll get knocked back on those sorts of issues.
So the business case has taken those considerations into play. Through the option development and testing, we have utilised the key street design guidance, both the local guidance and NZTA's guidance as well. So the guidance is quite adamant and quite strong that these, being future arterial roads, would not have car parking on these particular roads, and they would be for access for movement of people predominantly. So we've effectively created a design that's actually user friendly for vehicles, buses, and people walking and cycling as well. There's actually separation for cyclists and for people walking, and landscaping as well to enable that to take place. In terms of speeds, because this is only at concept design level, we haven't set those down in rigor, but we've inferred relevant design speeds through this process and designed the corridors accordingly.
So what sort of speeds would they be?
Typically 50 kilometres an hour maximum. Yeah. There would be some variances along the corridor based on land use. So where it's proximity to local schools or reserves and active reserves, etc., then it would be reduced at those places.
If I'm hopping off the bus and I'm wanting to go home, I'd walk down to the next intersection, effectively round the block to gain access to my property, yeah?
Yeah, typically access would be at the rear of properties on these, specifically on these two arterials, Tuakura Drive and the Boulevard. But there would be, through the structure planning process, there would be a mixture of other connecting local roads. Sorry, I'm just inviting Craig Richards to the table. Sorry, Craig's just joined us. Craig led the Becker team business case technical development. So, no, great.
Sorry. There would be pedestrian access on the main road, so people will still have a front gate. It'll depend on the urban design, obviously, that you implement down the line and that sort of detailed design. But there's definitely good examples where these sort of developments have a small laneway at the back, or for car access, and then your garage at the back. But actually, the house is more fronting onto the arterial, and you have a pedestrian access or a gate and things, so you wouldn't have to get off the bus and walk all the way around to come into your property.
Just so long as we've considered the kind of livability of the community here, it just doesn't come through in the paper and the design of the arterial, to me. Anyway.
It's the problem that Stephen's identified is that we're looking at this again in isolation, and we haven't got what you've just described, so that we can't see it personally. I wish we'd had this right through the whole of Papamoa. And you've heard me before that the difficulty with Papamoa is it's been developed in sections, and other than the TEL and Papamoa Beach Road and Maunganui Road, there's nothing through the centre, and you can't get from one bit to another. But however, I think that's right. You're aware that we didn't get the diagram? At 21, we didn't get a diagram. It wasn't either online or in our in the printed document. So we have no idea what the bus hub looks like.
Apologies, which page are you referring to?
It's 104. Under paragraph 21, it says the diagram below depicts the transport corridors and integration with the Papamoa East Interchange, Wairaki Town Centre and bus hub.
Yeah, we had a major fallout of InfoCouncil last week, and this dropped out, and we did put it back in again, but it obviously hasn't effectively come through. We can share that
It would be good
With
for us
you.
to have a look at least.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, anything else? It's now 12:24.
Happy to move.
Thank you,
the
Bill.
Recommendations, Chair, but just a brief comment in doing so, and I think we've touched on it now in terms of we're looking at the business case, there's structure planning work to be undertaken, the need, looking ahead, to actually bring these combination of initiatives and projects together so there is a total understanding, and we can perhaps address some of those concerns that Stephen had, because we can then see the total picture of what's happening. So I think it's one of those things, and you've heard me before in terms of private plan changes and others doing structure plannings. It's important to have all of the stuff together at some point.
Except that by the same token, we don't want to bog the council down with huge documents like this. So if you put the structure plan, do we get another one like this? So it's a way of taking the elements of the structure plan and putting them in so that you can understand what it looks like in the concept, rather than the whole structure plan.
I wasn't looking at a 1,000-page document,
No, but
but
just
it's
sounded
about
like this.
undertaking that work
Yeah.
so we can actually then see how this fits together.
Interacts. Yeah. I know, I was just making the point that you weren't meaning that you wanted another whole document like that.
I think the fact that the resolution is endorsement in terms of Te Tumu gives
Yeah.
you flexibility, because we do need to proceed to secure the funding now for the Wairaki Town Centre, but we didn't want to have it approved because then there's no flex to come back, as you say, later on at another point in time and just tweak or modify if you think that's appropriate when you've done further work on land use.
Someone prepared to second it? Shared, thank you. Okay, any further discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Thanks very much. Good fast intervention there. It was good. I could see you move up agitatedly. Okay, so we'll quickly do fast track approvals before we break for lunch, and note that Shared is taking no part in the discussions. This you, Andy?
Yeah, I can quickly just talk to this report if you like. So the government's introduced a fast track approvals bill for resource consents and approvals under various other pieces of legislation. The purpose of the bill is to provide a fast track decision making.
I think we all understand. Yep, we understand all
Very
that.
good. We've made a submission to the bill,
We have
generally
made a submission,
generally
yes.
supportive, and we've also considered which TCC projects if any, we might want to put forward at this stage to potentially be included in the bill when it is enacted. So these would be larger projects with significant consenting or approval requirements. We have identified 4 potential projects, and we are in the background working on applications for those, should you approve lodging those today. Those applications are due this Friday, the 3rd of May. That's why we're having to work in parallel. The 4 projects are the Kaituna stormwater overflow, which provides as a measure to prevent flooding in the broader Papamoa East catchment and required for Te Tumu development to commence. The Papamoa East Interchange Surplus Land Project, which is around the development and divestment of surplus land that TCC owns around the interchange, and particularly looking at housing as a component of that development, which is not consistent with the underlying zoning at the moment. The Turret Road 15th Ave upgrade, which I think is called Connecting the People or such in Welcome Bay, and that has components of consenting around the harbour, the coastal marine area, in terms of bridge structures and so on, and also the Porteri Parallel Farms sports field and housing project that we've been working on for some time. Certainly the housing component there is inconsistent with the underlying zoning. So those are the 4 projects. The Porteri project is dealt with in more detail in the next agenda item. So it's more the first three that are dealt with through the resolutions of this particular report.
Thanks, Andy. I think I think the four projects we should, I agree, we should be putting them forward to try and get them included in Schedule 2 of the bill. The worry I have is that they've got to be nationally or regionally significant. I'm just not sure that we've built that regional case for enough for our two rezoning ones. I think we should really be emphasising the unaffordability, where the highest unaffordability to household income in the country, blah, blah, blah. I think we've really got to build that up to show the regional significance, because it's quite a high test for us in just rezoning some land.
And we're focusing on that in the application document. Yeah, a significant component. Obviously, those projects deliver at least a couple of hundred homes each, if not more. So that is relatively significant in the scale of the issues we face.
Other than that, happy to move. Yep, Bill and Stephen. And of course, the Kaituna overflow. What is it called? Stormwater overflow is critical for Tumu. All right, I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Porteri. Some good work by staff.
Carl's going to introduce this one. So
It doesn't need to go into much detail because we're pretty familiar with it.
Okay, I won't go into much detail. So the purpose of the report in front of you is an update on progress in the planning to seek council approval to make the application for the Porteri project as part of the fast track approvals, and also to seek council direction regarding divestment of the housing land. So look, the report really just outlines where we are at, probably acknowledges the importance of making that application for the reasons that you've just given, the acute need for housing, and also seeks to outline the objectives in terms of that divestment of housing and why we need to head in that direction.
And to start the process for the divestment strategy.
Correct.
So I think the first thing is to say thank you to Ngāti Kahu that, we've worked together on this, I think, almost since our start as a commission. And despite wanting to move things forward, we're still very conscious of their desire to receive some housing outcomes for them. The purpose of starting that divestment strategy is, first of all, to get the fast track. If we get the fast track consenting, it will make it much easier for us through the divestment process to have some further conversations with them about how we might help them realise that. And we do need to go through the divestment strategy as outlined in council. So we should get that started in parallel anyway. So I don't have any questions. I think it's a good report. It's where we're at, and I'm happy. I'm happy to move. Actually, I'll move the recommendations. Don't do it often. Stephen seconded it. Any questions for the staff?
Just a comment, Chair, in terms of it's still, there's a number of recommendations there clearly indicate it's still a work in progress.
That's right.
So there's further investigations and work to be undertaken.
But I think for the people that we consulted with, a couple of years ago now, it's considerably altered. The plan's considerably altered. So we went out consulting on quite a large residential component that's now been changed quite considerably to have sports fields, recreation areas, protected environmental areas, and that connection from down to the river, and then recognising the historical significance, both of the past site, but also of the land itself to Ngāti Kahu. So we've moved a long way from that public consultation process, and I think taken into account a lot of the concerns that were raised through that process by the general public as well as by the mana whenua. Okay, no further discussion. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. And then that brings us to the exec report, and I think we might leave that. We'll break for lunch because we're only going to have half an hour for lunch. We will come back at 1 and go into public excluded to get, have we got someone phoning in at 1?
We will.
Right. That is on item
Harrington
Street.
Yeah, the other one.
The late item.
The other one, we've got Mike Nordale.
Nathanson is commuting between Thames and Auckland right now, so I'm just getting an ETA for him. What time he'll be back online?
Well, why don't we come back? If we've got him at 1 o'clock, we'll go into public excluded so that he can give us that advice. If he's not available, then we'll move it. We'll come back and do the executive report and then take Nathan at the end of that. So the meeting is adjourned now until 1 p.m.